بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. أما بعد، يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وأحسن الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. ثم أما بعد، يا عباد الله، الله سبحانه وتعالى أمر بحفظ الضروريات الخمس: الدين والنفس والعرض والمال والعقل. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He commands the preservation of 5 incumbent affairs, 5 things that are incumbent. They are the deen, the life, the dignity, reputation, and honor, wealth, and the intellects. The deen of Al-Islam has come to preserve these things, to protect these things, and to safeguard these things. The deen of Al-Islam has come with that which will enrich these 5 affairs. The deen of Islam is that which has come to prevent any infringement upon these 5 affairs. It is incumbent in these days of fitna, in these days of turmoil, trials and tribulations, that we understand exactly what is the deen of Al-Islam. Because by understanding what Islam is, by default, we will understand and we will know what it is not. When one reflects on the most despicable affair of terrorism, he will find that terrorism and the terrorists, they violate each and every one of these 5 to the full extent that they can be violated. He will find that they infringe upon each and every one of these 5, and they don't safeguard and protect not a single one of them, let alone all of them. So we can understand better what is terrorism, so we can have a better understanding on exactly what is terrorism. What is this thing that Islam has been at war with for centuries? Because Islam's war on terror, it didn't start post 9/11. Islam war on terror, it didn't start in this century only. No. Islam's war on terror, it goes back to the time of the Sahaba. It goes back to the time of the Sahaba. when these evil individuals first reared their heads, you find the Sahaba were quick into taking up arms against them. The war on terror, it began centuries ago. Ala kullin, let us understand better what is terrorism. وقال العلامة زيد المدخلي حفظه الله تعالى Al-irhab, this is terrorism in Islam. This is how we translate terrorism into the Arabic language. Al-irhab kalimatun mabniyyun laha ma'na ذو صور متعددة يجمعها. That terrorism is a word that is fixed upon meanings that will take many different faces. It has many different expressions, many different faces that it will take. And they could be comprised in the following. The Shaykh, he says, Al-ikhafa wa tarwi' li-aminin, fearing and invoking dread and terrorizing those who are in a state of safety. Terrorizing those who are in a state of safety, invoking in them dread, tremendous fear. The Shaykh, he goes on and he says, وَقَدْ تَجَاوَزَ الْإِخَافَ وَالتَّرْوِيعَ إِلَى إِزْهَاقِ الْأَنفُسِ الْبَرِيَّةِ. And you will find that this invoking of fear, this invoking of dread and spreading of terror, it can reach the point that lives will be lost, lives will be destroyed and annihilated, people will be murdered and they will be killed, those who are innocent. If we give an example of any of the indiscriminate terrorist acts, those victims had nothing to do with anything. Those victims didn't infringe upon them. Those victims didn't harm their families. Those victims didn't take from them anything. Those victims had nothing to do with it. But yet they are the ones who are victimized. They are the ones who are terrorized. Their life was not protected. Their honor was not protected, and the like. The Shaykh, he goes on and he says, وَإِتْلَافِ الْأَمْوَالِ الْمَعْصُومَةِ أَوْ نَهَبَهَا. And also the destruction of wealth that is to be protected. The destruction of wealth and properties that are to be protected, or the plundering of them. Or the plundering of them. So you find that what? That the honors and the wealth are not protected by the terrorists. And the Shaykh goes on, he says, وَهَتَكَ الْأَعْرَاضِ الْمَوْصُونَةِ, and the tearing down of the dignity and the honor that should be protected. So when we reflect back now on those things that Islam has come to preserve, from the religion, the life, the honor and dignity, the wealth and the intellect, he will find that the terrorists, they infringe upon each and every one of these things. The Shaykh, he goes on and he says, also from the terrorism, شَقَ الْعَصَى الْجَمَاعَةِ, that it destroys the unity. It destroys the unity. وَمِنْ ثَمَّ تَغْيِيرُ النِّعَمِ لِتَحِلْ مَحِلْهَا الْفِتَنِ وَالنَّقَمِ. And it also, from this standpoint, you find that it changes the bounty. It changes that good and that bounty, and puts in its place instead trials and tribulation, turmoil. It puts in its place instead malice and indignation. Naam, it replaces that bounty with malice, replaces that bounty with trials and tribulations, replaces that bounty with indignation. وَيَظْهَرُ فَسَادٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ, and it spreads corruption in the land. And it spreads corruption in the land. When one reflects back on those things that Islam has come to preserve, those things that Islam has come to safeguard, he realizes that terrorism, by its definition, infringes upon each and every one of these five. Terrorism, by its definition, by its very nature, goes against each and every one of these five. So therefore we will understand with the most clearest of understanding that terrorism has nothing to do with Islam. That Islam is free from the acts of terrorism, and Islam is free from the terrorists. Islam has nothing to do with terrorism whatsoever. Islam does not advocate, does not encourage any type of terrorism whatsoever. But Islam is against all forms and all types of terrorism, regardless of who the terrorist is. Whether he is a Muslim, he is a Christian, he is a Jew, he is a Buddhist, he is whoever. Islam is against all acts, all types, all manifestations of terrorism and all terrorists. Period. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in His noble book, Inna Allah ya'muru bil adl. But verily Allah, He commands with justice. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He commands with justice. Terrorism is injustice. It's unjust. So we know this is not what Allah ta'ala commands. He doesn't command anyone to do terrorism, but rather He commands with justice. Wal ihsan. And having patience and doing the goods in the most excellent of manners. Allah Ta'ala commands us to be patient and to perform the deeds in the most excellent of ways. The acts of terrorism, they are the exact opposite of this. You find that they come about due to people's hastiness. You find that they are acts that are from the most despicable, the most heinous of acts whatsoever. This is contrary to what Islam commands. Allah Ta'ala, He goes on and He says, وَإِتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَةِ, and to give help to kith and kin, to help out family members, to make things easy upon them. This is not what the terrorists do. They don't help the family members. They don't give them aid, but they make their lives miserable. Look at what happens to from the repercussions. What happens to the families of the terrorists. How they are put to scrutiny. How they are put to all this unnecessary trials and problems. Why? Because one of their ignorant, stupid, foolish relatives went out and committed an act of terrorism. Now they're down being questioned for days upon days. Now they're placed under scrutiny. Now their financials are being looked at. Now their lives are going through with a fine-tooth comb. Why? Because of that foolish one in their family who committed these vile acts of terrorism. They have totally contradicted that which Allah Ta'ala has commanded them to do. There is no doubt that these actions are not from Islam whatsoever. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, He goes on and He says, وَيَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ, and He prohibits all types of acts of indecency. All types of obscene acts like fornication, homosexuality, murder, killing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has prohibited these vile, despicable acts of murder and killing. And you find this is the mandate of the terrorists, to murder and to kill. Allah ta'ala, He goes on and He says, wal munkar, and all types of things that are haram. Everything that is haram, Islam prohibits. Everything that is haram, everything that is prohibited, Islam prohibits. Allah Ta'ala, He prohibits them. And from those things that are prohibited in haram, murder, killing, destruction of property and wealth, all of this is haram. Islam prohibits it. Allah Ta'ala, He prohibits it. Allah Ta'ala goes on and He said, وَالْبَغِي, and all types of oppressive acts, all acts of oppression, all oppressive things, Allah prohibits. Islam prohibits. When one reflects on those things that Allah Ta'ala prohibits, he will find that the terrorists, they take to, they act upon each and every one of them. They commit each and every one of those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited. When one understands this, how can he ever think that terrorism has anything to do with Al-Islam? Terrorism is un-Islamic from its beginning to its end. Terrorism is un-Islamic. Allah Ta'ala, He says, يَعِظُكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. Allah Ta'ala, He says, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala admonishes you so that perhaps you may take heed. Allah admonishes you so that perhaps you may take heed. Ya ibad, when are we going to take heed? When are we going to know and to realize that these acts of terrorism have nothing to do with the deen of Al-Islam? The Prophet ﷺ, he said in a hadith that is Hasan, that has been collected by Imam Ibn Majah wa ghayruh, La darar wa la dirar. There is no harm, or there should be neither harming nor reciprocating harm. This is what the Prophet ﷺ, he told us. There is no harm nor precipitation of harm. When one looks at terrorism, do they implement this statement of the Prophet ﷺ? Do they implement the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ that there is no harm nor reciprocation of harm? No, they do not. But in fact, they harm. And as a result of their actions comes harm. The Prophet ﷺ has told them one thing, they have done exactly the opposite. This is not from the deen of Al-Islam whatsoever. So for those who don't know, for those who are unclear, after having seen this, and this is but an example, this is just from the proofs and evidences that show us that terrorism has nothing to do with Al-Islam. This is just from the proofs and evidence that show us that the way of the terrorism is a way that is most un-Islamic. When one realizes this, then one will know the reality. One will be able to put things in their proper place. So when those devils, when those shayateen, when they come to you and they tell you that we have to commit these acts of terrorism so as to give victory to Al-Islam, we will know the surety that it is impossible to give victory to Al-Islam by way of un-Islamic means. How are you going to establish the good by doing evil? How are you going to establish righteousness by being treacherous? How are you going to establish honesty through lying and deceit? How are you going to establish justice through injustice? It's impossible. How are you going to establish the good by way of harm? It's impossible. That's like saying we will wait for shaitan to give victory to Al-Islam. What aql will accept such a thing? But these people play on the intellect. They destroy the intellects. They corrupt the intellect with the most awful of corruption. Because that is in essence what these people understand and what they think, that shaitan will establish Islam. Ya Salaam. Islam is free from the terrorists and free from terrorism. This is something that it must be upon the tongues of every Muslim. We must make it known. We must make it clear that Islam has nothing to do with these vile acts. Whether it is that which has taken place in Boston, whether it is that which has taken place on 9/11, whether it is that which has taken place from the bombings that have happened in the land of the Muslims, regardless where it had taken place, regardless who had done it, and so on and so forth, Islam is free from it. It is upon the Muslims to let the world know this. Islam has nothing to do with these acts, because these acts are un-Islamic. هذا أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه فإنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وبعد. Ya ibad, in these times of trials and tribulations, of which the Prophet ﷺ, he foretold will come upon mankind, it is a must that we stick to that which the Prophet ﷺ has commanded us to stick to. As the Prophet ﷺ, he told us in the famous hadith of Abdis bin Sariyah, وَمَنْ يَعِشْ مِنْكُمْ فَسَيَرَ اخْتِلَافٍ كَثِيرًا. And whoever lives from amongst you, he will see much differing. The Prophet ﷺ, he told us this is already going to happen. Going to be much differing. Fitan, trials, tribulations. And the Prophet ﷺ, he gave us the remedy. He said, فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالسُنَّةِ وَسُنَّةِ خُلَفَاءِ الرَّاشِدِينَ الْمَهْدِيِّينَ مِنْ بَعْدِ. And to the end of the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that, so therefore it is binding upon you, it is wajib upon you, that you stick to my sunnah, and the sunnah of the rightly guided khulafa after me. It is important that we stick to the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ. But there is no way to stick to the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ except that we have to learn what the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ is. So in these times, it is incumbent that we learn about our religion. It is incumbent that we learn about Islam so that we may implement it. That we learn about Islam so that we know what it is. That we learn about Islam so that we know what it's not. So if someone comes to us and tells us to do a thing that's un-Islamic, we will be able to determine and to realize this is not from Islam, so we're not going to do it. We're going to stay far away from it. Naam. The poet, he said, Al-ilm, قال الله, قال رسوله, قال صحابة ليس خلف فيه. ما العلم نصبك بالخلاف سفاهة بين الرسول وبين الرأي سفيه. He said that knowledge, so that we understand what is knowledge. We go to learn our deen, we have to stick to the knowledge. So now we only need to know what is knowledge. He said that knowledge is Allah said, His messenger said, the Sahaba said, and there is no difference with regards to this. Knowledge is not you're attributing the differing of a foolish one between the messenger and between the opinions of a foolish. This is not knowledge. That a person, he comes and he says, oh, but so-and-so, his opinion, he says this, so-and-so says such and such. But what they are narrating is contrary to the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ. You bring a man a hadith, you say the Prophet ﷺ has said this, warning us from these evil ways, and he says, but our Shaykh says so-and-so. But Fulan, I saw his clip on YouTube, he said such and such. But I read inside of this book so-and-so from the statement of such and such an author. This is not ilm. Knowledge is what the Prophet ﷺ said. If we find anyone from the human beings contradicting the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, then what do we do with that statement of that one who contradicted the Prophet ﷺ? What do we do with it? We take it and we throw it away. We give it no credence, we pay it no mind. Because the truth has more right to be followed. We have to stick to the knowledge, and that knowledge is what Allah Ta'ala has informed us of. The knowledge is what the Prophet ﷺ has informed us of. The knowledge is what? Is that which the Sahaba radiyallahu ta'ala anhum have taught us, and what they were upon and how they understood. وقال إمام الزاعي رحمه الله تعالى العلم ما جاء به أصحاب محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. He said that knowledge is what the companions of Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم they came with. فما كان غير ذلك فليس بعلم. And whatever is other than that is not knowledge. Whatever is contrary to what the Sahaba taught this nation, whatever is contrary to the understanding of the Sahaba, that's not knowledge. That's not knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He commands us to stick to the way of the Sahaba. Just as the Prophet ﷺ commanded us to stick to their way in the hadith of Irbad that we aforementioned. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَمَنْ يُشَاقِقِ الرَّسُولِ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ الْهُدَى. Whoever contradicts the messenger after clear guidance had been known to him, وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى وَنُصْلِيهِ جَهَنَّمْ وَسَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا. Allah Ta'ala, He says, then we will leave him, or whoever contradicts the messenger, after clear guidance have been made known to him, and he goes against the way of the believers. He goes against the way of the believers. Man hum al-mu'minun. Who are the believers in this ayah that is mentioned? The Sahaba, first and foremost. Those ones who believed when the ayah was revealed. The Sahaba. Naam. And whoever goes against the way of the believers, meaning against the way of the Sahaba, Allah Ta'ala, He says, we will leave him to that which he has left himself to, or we will leave him to that which he has brought himself to, and we will enter him into Jahannam, with an evil of destinations. So for the one who contradicts the way of the Prophet ﷺ, the one who goes against the way of the Sahaba, then for him is what? The hellfire. He is threatened with the hellfire. When one contemplates on the way of the terrorists and what they are upon, and how it contradicts the Prophet ﷺ, how it contradicts the way of the believers, it contradicts the way of the Sahaba, then he knows that that individual is on a road that leads to hell. How can that be from Islam? Islam don't lead to hell. Islam leads to heaven. Islam leads to Jannah. It is the only way to Jannah. It is the only way to heaven. But that which is un-Islamic, well then his roads are many. And each one of these roads has a common destination. And that destination is the hellfire. So it must be known, it must be said. The message must be clearly given to every flamboyant or closeted terrorist that we are free from you. And you are free from us. We have nothing to do with you. We condemn you and your ways. We condemn your ideology. We are at war with you. La marhaban bikum abadan. You are never welcome here. There is no marhaban for you ever. You are never welcome amongst us, in our midst. You will never be tolerated. Ever. That has to be a message that is made clear and is known to every flamboyant and or closeted terrorist. We don't care how you look. We don't care where you came from. We don't care what language you speak. If you come with this ideology, we are free from you. We are against you. We are at war with you. You are never welcome with us. We will never tolerate you. Let this message be spread on the tongues of the Muslims, throughout the Masjid of the Muslims, throughout the Marakis of the Muslims, from the Manabir of the Muslims. Let this be spread, that Islam is free from all acts and all types and all kinds of terrorists and terrorism. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر لي ولكم وأقيموا الصلاة.